Right now, the United States Congress is engaged in a legislative fire sale, and the product they're rushing to the floor is a collection of bills that pose a direct, measurable threat to the financial security of every American citizen and investor. This isn't political hyperbole, it's an analysis of policy mechanics and their inevitable economic consequences. We are witnessing a perfect storm of bad timing, poor design, and political expediency that creates a clear and present danger to your portfolio, your savings, and your economic future. The storm begins with what should be a foundational element of societal stability: healthcare. Current proposals circulating in the Senate are not mere adjustments to a complex destabilization. The core mechanics of these plans, when modeled, show a trajectory that doesn't lead to modest premium increases, but to a tripling or even quadrupling of costs for a significant portion of... Imagine a future where a family's budget isn't strained by healthcare, but is dominated by it, where 40 to 50% of household income is consumed by insurance premiums and out-of-pocket expenses. This isn't a dystopian fiction, it's the logical endpoint of the policy frameworks currently under consideration. The ripple effects of such a scenario are catastrophic. Disposable income evaporates. Consumer spending, the engine of the U.S. economy, seizes up. Savings rates plummet as every extra dollar is redirected to medical costs. The macroeconomic impact would be a severe contraction, a drag on GDP growth that would make current economic worries seem quaint. Furthermore, the political solutions on offer are theater. One side proposes direct cash payments that are mathematically insufficient to cover the exploding cost, a band-aid on a hemorrhage. The other side offers no substantive alternative plan at all. This bipartisan policy vacuum on an issue of such magnitude is itself a profound market risk. Compounding this primary threat is the persistent specter of a federal government shutdown. As negotiations break down on one set of bills, the fundamental business of funding the government itself is once again being used as a political bargaining chip. The probability of a shutdown, as tracked by prediction markets, is spiking erratically. For investors in the markets, a shutdown is an injection of pure, unadulterated uncertainty. It halts the flow of crucial economic data from agencies, freezes regulatory approvals and contracts, undermines consumer and business confidence, and signals a level of governmental dysfunction that discourages long-term investment and plan. This uncertainty acts as a tax on growth, a friction that slows economic activity and rattles markets. It creates a wait-and-see paralysis that is antithetical to a forward-moving economy. The threat alone is damaging. The occurrence would be a tangible cost. Simultaneously, the rhetoric around trade and tariffs is reaching a fever pitch, promising vast sums of wealth flowing into the country, trillions and trillions, as some claim. Yet this rhetoric exists in a vacuum of evidence. Where is this wealth in the real economy? Why are we not seeing it reflected in wage growth, tax relief, or infrastructure investment for the average citizen? This dissonance between grand promise and tangible reality creates a different kind of risk. The risk of policy based on political narrative rather than economic reality. Tariffs are taxes, and they ultimately are paid by consumers and businesses in the form of higher prices and reduced choice. Promising generated wealth while implementing policies that act as a drag on purchasing power is a contradictory stance that shakes confidence. It tells the market that political messaging may be prioritized over sound economic stewardship. Finally, in a desperate search for revenue to offset other political priorities, the legislative net is being cast into unlikely waters, such as the taxation of gambling losses. Targeting niche sectors with new, complex tax rules is a sign of a treasury under pressure. More importantly, such moves often have unintended consequences. In this case, the likely outcome is not increased revenue, but the driving of that economic activity offshore to unregulated markets, which harms domestic businesses, reduces tourism, and kills jobs in that sector. It's a myopic cash grab that undermines a legitimate industry. This collective wave of policy, the healthcare time bomb, the shutdown threat, The empty tariff promises and the predatory niche taxation creates a layered, multifaceted risk environment. It is not a single bad bill you can point to, but an atmosphere of legislative chaos where the primary outputs are uncertainty, higher costs, and constraints on growth. For anyone with assets in the market, savings in the bank, or plans for their financial future, this chaotic output from Washington is not background noise. It is the single largest source of systemic risk on the horizon, threatening not through a sudden crash, but through a slow, grinding erosion of the very foundations of economic stability and personal wealth creation. Your finances are not collateral damage in these political fights. They are increasingly the intended target for revenue and the unintended victim of profound dysfunction. Recognizing this wave is the first and most critical step in navigating it. A quiet but decisive war is being waged in the corridors of Washington, D.C., and its outcome will determine the financial landscape of the next generation. On one side is the burgeoning frontier of digital assets, decentralized finance, and technological sovereignty. On the other is the entrenched multi-trillion-dollar architecture of traditional finance. The battle is not about one specific token or company. It is a fundamental conflict of ideologies. Open, transparent, and permissionless systems versus closed, intermediary, controlled, and permissioned ones. Recent developments in Congress indicate that, far from embracing the future, key power centers are actively working to cripple American leadership in this space, handing a monumental strategic advantage to global competitors. The central front in this war is the legislative process surrounding the Clarity Act. Initially heralded as a landmark, bipartisan effort to provide a clear regulatory framework for digital assets in the U.S., the act represented a rare moment of alignment between innovators and lawmakers. It promised the legal certainty necessary for billions of dollars in capital to be deployed domestically, fostering job creation, technological advancement, and ensuring the U.S. remained the epicenter of financial innovation. However, in a classic tale of Washington dysfunction, the act is now being systematically gutted behind closed doors. As the clock ticks down to a legislative recess, last-minute negotiations are not refining the bill. They are loading it with poison pills, provisions designed to make it unpalatable to its original supporters. The most egregious of these, a direct assault on a core utility of the crypto economy, the potential ban on stablecoins offering yield or interest. This specific attack is not a minor technical adjustment. It is a deliberate attempt to strip a transformative technology of its primary value proposition. Banning yield on a stablecoin, a digital dollar designed for the internet age, is a policy move of profound ignorance or profound malice. It is the economic equivalent of mandating that all cars must be powered by horses. Stablecoin yield is not a gimmick. It is a mechanism that unlocks efficient, accessible, and programmable savings, lending, and liquidity across a global 24/7 market. It represents a direct challenge to the traditional banking model, where interest rates are set by institutions and access is gated. By seeking to outlaw this function, the banking lobby, which is visibly and aggressively driving this change, aims to neuter the competitive threat. They are not trying to regulate innovation. They are trying to legislate it into irrelevance before it can mature. This sabotage of the Clarity Act creates a domino effect of negative consequence. First, it signals to the global crypto industry that the United States is no longer a viable home for foundational financial technology. Entrepreneurs, developers, and investment capital will flow to jurisdictions with smarter, more forward-looking regimes in Singapore, the EU, or the UK. The US will be left importing the financial technologies of the future, just as it ceded leadership in manufacturing and other tech sectors. Second, it creates a chilling regulation by enforcement environment. If the legislative path to clarity is blocked, the only guidance left comes from aggressive and often contradictory lawsuits from agencies like the SEC, which stifles all but the largest, most legally armored companies. Furthermore, this attack is not isolated. It operates in tandem with other stealth maneuvers buried within sprawling, must-pass spending bills, the kind voted on in the dead of night under threat of government shutdown are clauses that lay the legal groundwork for a central bank digital currency, CBDC. This is the ultimate weapon in this war, a digital dollar that is not open, neutral, or permissionless, but one that is programmable, surveillable, and directly controlled by the Federal Reserve and the Treasury. The inclusion of these clauses, despite explicit promises to the contrary, reveals a long-term strategy. If they can't kill decentralized alternatives through regulation, they aim to outcompete them with a state-controlled monopoly that offers the convenience of digital currency without any of the individual sovereignty or privacy. Even the private sector is feeling pressure to conform to this old-world model. We see established crypto exchanges beginning to wall off basic functions like earning yield behind premium subscription services, effectively recreating the tiered, fee-extracting models of traditional banks. This is a direct result of the hostile regulatory environment. Innovation is being bent backward into familiar and less threatening shapes. The narrative pushed by traditional finance giants is one of consumer protection and systemic risk. In reality, their advocacy and lobbying efforts, as seen in calls to clamp down on decentralized trading protocols, are about protecting rent-seeking business models. They fear a world where financial middlemen are rendered obsolete by open-source peer-to-peer code that provides transparent and fair access to liquidity. The argument that DeFi cannot provide fair access is particularly ironic, coming from institutions responsible for decades of opaque markets, front-running, and preferential treatment for privileged clients. The outcome of this battle is not preordained, but the current trajectory is alarming. The concerted effort to ban utility, sneak in surveillance tools, and pressure the private sector into old molds represents a full-spectrum attack on financial innovation. It is a choice between a future where individuals have verifiable ownership and control over their assets on global, open networks, and a future where all digital finance flows through sanctioned, surveilled, and tightly controlled channels. Washington is not merely being slow to adapt. Powerful factions within it are actively choosing the latter, risking America's technological and financial future in the process. For anyone invested in the promise of a more open and equitable financial system, understanding this attack is not optional. It is essential for the Kodak legislative update from Washington and Stuttgart, so financial VAs nias diabolical stories to consumed as passive entertainment. They all love Mukatsuni is broadcasting clay and giant massage are of usamong stubble from the steep. For the individual saver, investor, and citizen, the imperative has decisively shifted from passive growth to active defense. The foundational assumption that institutions will act rationally, that policy will generally be geared toward stability and growth, and that the playing field will remain recognizable. These assumptions are now liabilities. Proactive, defensive positioning is no longer a strategy for the paranoid few. It is the essential new baseline for anyone seeking to preserve and grow their wealth in the coming decade. Thus, Shutdown begins with a fundamentally changing mindset from citizen to sovereign individual. And Washington's dysfunction, as evidenced by the last-minute avalanche of contradictory and high-risk bills, demonstrates that you cannot outsource your financial security to political actors whose timelines are measured in election cycles, not generations. Their primary incentives are short-term political wins and headline management, not long-term economic optimization. When healthcare policy is crafted in a way that could vaporize disposable income, when crypto regulation is hijacked to protect banking monopolies, and when tax policy becomes a frantic scavenger hunt for revenue, the state is revealing itself not as a steward of your prosperity, but as its greatest potential product through computer DPS and accepting this reality is not cynical, of as this first crucial step of financial literacy. Your financial plan must now include a Washington risk variable, accounting for the high probability of destabilizing, wealth-eroding policy. Operationally, defensive positioning manifests in several concrete actions. The first and most critical is the recategorization of assets. This means moving beyond the traditional stocks versus bonds allocation to a framework that includes sovereign versus custodial and censorship-resistant via system-dependent. The push against crypto and for CBDC is a direct attack on asset sovereignty. Therefore, taking definitive steps towards self-custody, moving a portion of your digital assets off exchanges and into hardware wallets you control, is not a niche tech move. It is the modern equivalent of pulling cash from an unstable bank. Het is a direct hudje against raskavyo suits bung frozen so de platform ba chanjang rugged lot rojama corporate complaints dasuj. Similarly, understanding and utilizing decentralized financial DeFi protocols, despite their current regulatory risks, represents a form of financial dungeness, keeping some value in systems that are global, permissionless, and resilient to the whims of any single nation-state's political turmoil. Second, defensive positioning demands radical geographic and jurisdictional diversification. When the U.S. government threatens shutdowns and passes erratic tax laws, holding all your assets and conducting all your business within its borders concentrates your risk. This doesn't necessarily mean expatriating. It means intelligently diversifying. Thus, should involve öppning reputable bank account and financial stab förundersökningss dakban holding pappanasavans globally recognized observations the system explung logo residence programs on countries with malproductive fiscal and regulatory policies. It's about ensuring that no single political event in one country can incapacitate your entire financial life. Your passport should not be your investment prison. Third, defense requires an aggressive pursuit of optionality. This means structuring your affairs to maintain maximum flexibility and choice in the face of uncertainty. Is your career reliant on a single industry that is in the political crosshairs, e.g., tech, finance, energy? Developing parallel skills or income streams that are more resistant to regulatory attack is a defensive move. Are your investments purely in public markets that swing violently on every tweet from the Capitol? Allocating a portion to private, real assets like productive land, certain commodities, or local business equity that are less correlated to political sentiment creates a buffer. Optionality is about having moves you can make when the official playbook falls apart. Finally, and underpinning all else, is the defensive weapon of information supremacy. In an age of political theater and complex, hidden legislative riders, what you don't know can and will hurt you. Passive consumption of mainstream financial news is insufficient. It often reports on effects, not causes, and is filtered through the very institutional lenses that are under stress. Defensive positioning requires actively seeking out analysts, legal experts, and on-the-ground journalists who can decode legislative text, track regulatory proposals, and explain the real-world implications. This is not about finding confirmation bias, but about gaining tactical intelligence. You must become your own intelligence agency for your wealth. Understanding threats like the nuances of a stablecoin bill or the CBDC language in a defense appropriations package before they become market-moving events. Ultimately, defensive positioning is not about fear. It is about prudence and empowerment. The signals from Washington are not blips of temporary chaos. They are symptoms of a system in advanced institutional decay, where short-term political survival trumps long-term national stewardship. To ignore these signals is to be a passenger on a ship where the crew is arguing over the map while heading for rock. Defensive positioning is the process of building your own lifeboat, charting your own supplementary course, and ensuring you have the supplies and skills to reach shore regardless of the fate of the vessel. It acknowledges that the primary financial risk has shifted from market volatility to policy volatility, and it responds not with panic, but with deliberate, sober, and systematic preparation. Your financial sovereignty is now your own responsibility to assert and protect. The time to build your defenses is not when the siege begins, but when you first see the dust of the approaching army on the horizon. That dust is now clearly visible.